The polished Italian loafer struck the cardboard sign with enough force to spin it across the cracked sidewalk. "You can't be serious," the voice sneered, dripping with the kind of arrogance that only money and a complete lack of soul could buy. "I have investors coming in 20 minutes to look at the site across the street. I cannot have this cluttering the view." Jax, 15 years old and weary beyond his years, didn't look up immediately. He kept his eyes on the scuffed toes of his own sneakers, shoes he pulled from a dumpster behind a bowling alley 3 months ago. He reached out hand, stained with engine grease and city grime, to retrieve his sign. It read, "We'll work for food. God bless." "I'm moving, sir," Jax mumbled, his voice rasping from the dry, dusty heat of the California summer. "Just gathering my stuff. Not fast enough." The man was Councilman Richard Sterling, a man whose campaign billboards plastered the city with slogans about cleaning up our streets. He loomed over Jax, adjusting his silk tie. Beside him stood a private security guard, hand resting threateningly on a baton. "You are a blight, kid. A rat. This city is trying to rebuild, and you're just the trash that refuses to be swept away. If you are here when I come back with the developers, I'll have you thrown in a cell for vagrancy. Do you understand me?" Jack stood up. He was thin, his ribs visible through the threadbare gray t-shirt, but there was a hardness in his jaw that hadn't been there a year ago. A year ago, before his mom died, he was just a kid who liked math and baseball. Now he was a ghost haunting the underbelly of Riverside. "I said I'm moving," Jack said, meeting Sterling's eyes. Sterling scoffed, turning his back. "Filth," he spat, walking toward the construction site across the road. The old, dilapidated tenement building that was slated for luxury renovation under Sterling's corrupt oversight. Jax watched him go, anger burning a low, hot coal in his stomach. He grabbed his backpack, broken zipper held by a safety pin, containing his only worldly possessions, 2 pairs of socks, a toothbrush, and his mother's silver bird necklace. He slung it over one shoulder. He turned to leave, to find another bridge or basement, just another invisible boy in a world that didn't want him. Crack. The sound wasn't like a gunshot. It was deeper. It was the sound of the earth screaming. Jack spun around. Across the street, the tenement building, the one Sterling was standing in front of, the one filled with construction workers and a few remaining tenants, shuddered. It didn't fall over. It folded. The east wall buckled inward like wet cardboard. The groan of twisting steel and shattering concrete drowned out the city traffic. For a split second, time froze. Jack saw Councilman Sterling, the man who had just called him trash, freeze in terror, diving behind his security guard as the facade blew out. Then the world turned gray. A massive cloud of pulverized concrete and drywall dust exploded outward, engulfing the street. People screamed. Cars slammed on brakes. Jack stood on the edge of the disaster zone. His survival instinct screamed at him to run. "Run away. You're invisible. Stay that way." Then he heard it. It was faint, cutting through the settling dust and the shouting of adults. A cry. High-pitched, terrified, and suffocating. A baby. Jax looked at the police line tape fluttering in the wind. He looked at Sterling, who was now dusting off his suit, shouting at his phone. "Get me out of here. I don't care about the workers. Get my car." The rat didn't run away. The trash didn't hide. Jax took a breath of the copper-tasting air, ducked out of the yellow tape, and ran straight into hell. The heat hit him first. It wasn't just the summer sun anymore. It was the friction heat of tons of collapsing material. The air inside the ruin zone was thick, tasting of old insulation and panic. "Hey, you. Get back." A police officer shouted from the perimeter, but his voice was thin and distant. Jax ignored him. He scrambled over a slab of concrete the size of a minivan, his sneakers slipping on loose gravel. The crying was coming from the east wing, the section that had pancaked the hardest. Jax moved with the agility of someone who had learned to navigate the city's forgotten spaces. He climbed through a window frame that no longer had a wall attached to it. Inside, the world was a jagged puzzle of destruction. Twisted rebar jutted out like spears. Ruptured pipes hissed, spewing water and gas. "Hello," Jack screamed, coughing as the dust coated his throat. "Where are you?" "Wah." The sound was below him. Deep. Jax dropped to his knees. He found a gap between a fallen support beam and a crushed sofa. It was dark down there, a claustrophobic tunnel formed by the debris. Don't think about the weight, he told himself. Don't think about the 1,000 tons of rock hanging over your head. He remembered his mother's voice. You're brave, Jax. You're my little protector. I'm coming, he whispered. He squeezed into the hole. It was tight. Jagged edges of broken floor tiles scraped his back. A protruding nail snagged his shirt, slicing a line across his shoulder blade, but the adrenaline was pumping so hard he barely felt the sting. He crawled on his belly, swimming through the wreckage. The crying grew louder, then turned into a wet, hacking cough. That was bad. That meant dust inhalation. I see you, Jax gasped. 10 feet in, wedged under a heavy oak door that had fallen across a dresser, creating a miraculous little triangular pocket of space, was a baby girl. She looked to be about 9 months old. She was caked in gray dust, her pink onesie turning the color of ash. She was clutching a teddy bear wearing a tiny leather vest. She was terrified, red-faced, her eyes wide and streaming tears that cut clean tracks through the grime on her face. Hey, it's okay, Jack soothed, though his own heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He reached out a shaking hand. The baby looked at him. For a second, the crying stopped. She stared at him with intense, piercing blue eyes, eyes that seemed too old, too fierce for an infant. She reached out a chubby, dust-covered hand and grabbed Jax's finger. I got you, Jax promised. I'm going to get you out. He maneuvered his body, trying to shield her. As he pulled her gently from the pocket, the building groaned above them. Dust trickled down from the ceiling of their tiny tomb. The structure was shifting. Move? No. He tucked the baby, who he would later learn was named Mia, against his chest, shielding her head with his hand. He began the agonizing crawl backward. It was harder going back. He had to use one arm to crawl and the other to hold Mia. His knees were raw, bleeding through his jeans. The air was getting thinner, hotter. Suddenly, a chunk of concrete the size of a fist dislodged from above and struck Jax hard on the shoulder, the same one already cut. A bolt of white-hot pain shot down his arm. He gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out, refusing to drop the child. Almost there, little one, he grunted. Almost there. He saw the shaft of light ahead. The exit. He pushed his body to the limit, dragging himself out of the hole just as a secondary collapse rumbled behind him, sealing the tunnel he had just been in. He tumbled out onto the relatively stable slab of concrete in the open air. He was covered in blood, his own and the building's filth, and he was gasping for air. But the baby wasn't. Jax looked down. Mia was limp in his arms. Her face was turning a terrifying shade of blue-gray. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't moving. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the adrenaline. No, Jax pleaded. He looked around. The firefighters were still setting up on the other side of the collapse. The paramedics were blocked by the debris field. He was alone. Think. 7th grade health class. Mr. Henderson. He remembered the dummy. Annie, are you okay? Jax laid Mia down on a flat piece of drywall. He tilted her head back gently, lifting her chin to open the airway. He put his ear to her mouth. Nothing. No breath. Her chest was still. Please, Jax whispered, tears finally spilling over, mixing with the dust on his cheeks. Don't die. You made it out. Don't die now. He placed 2 fingers on the center of her tiny chest, just below the nipple line. Push hard, push fast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He compressed her chest, counting out loud. His own blood dripped from his shoulder onto the concrete next to her. 28, 29, 30. He pinched her nose, covered her small mouth with his own, and gave 2 gentle puffs of air. He watched her chest rise. Come on. He went back to compressions. 1, 2, 3. Hey, you there. Jax looked up. It was Councilman Sterling. He had returned, now flanked by a cameraman from a local news crew who had arrived with vulture-like speed. Sterling saw the opportunity. Get away from the victim. Sterling shouted, striking a pose of authority. I will handle this. Get the camera on me. She's not breathing. Jax screamed back, not stopping the compressions. 11, 12, 13. You dirty little vagrant, you're hurting her. Sterling lunged forward, grabbing Jax by the shoulder, his injured shoulder. Pain exploded in Jax's body. He shoved Sterling's hand away with a ferocity that shocked the older man. Touch me again, and I'll kill you. She needs air. Jax bent down. Breath, breath. Sterling hesitated, realizing the camera was rolling. He backed off, smoothing his suit, looking for a way to spin this. Jax ignored the politician. He ignored the world. There was only the baby. Compression, compression, compression. Please, Mama. Jax prayed to the ghost of his mother. Help me. On the fourth cycle, something happened. Mia's body jerked. A wet, guttural cough erupted from her small throat. Then a gasp. Beautiful, desperate suck of air. And then the wail. Loud, angry, and undeniably alive. Jax collapsed back on his heels, his hands trembling violently. He scooped her up, holding her close, rocking her. I got you. You're okay. You're okay. The paramedics were finally scrambling over the rubble. But before they could reach Jax, the sound of the city changed. It started as a low rumble, a vibration in the soles of Jax's sneakers. Then it grew. It wasn't the building collapsing again. It was rhythmic, thunderous, mechanical. The roar of engines. Not one or two. Hundreds. The street outside the collapse zone was suddenly flooded with chrome and black leather. The sound was deafening, drowning out the sirens. Motorcycles. A sea of them. They didn't park, they swarmed. They jumped the curbs, blocking the intersections, creating a wall of steel around the disaster site. At the front of the pack rode a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He was huge, 6'4", shoulders like a towing rig, beard streaked with gray. He wore a cut, a leather vest, that was weathered and faded. On the back was the most feared insignia in the biker world, the Winged Death's head. Hell's Angels. California. This was Marcus Anvil Thorne, the vice president of the chapter. And he looked like a man possessed. He killed his engine and vaulted off the bike before it even fully rested on its kickstand. His eyes were wild, scanning the wreckage. Where is she? Anvil roared. His voice was loud enough to make the police officers step back. Councilman Sterling, seeing a new opportunity to be the center of attention, stepped forward. Sir, please stay back. I have coordinated the rescue effort in. Anvil didn't even look at him. He simply walked through Sterling like the man was made of smoke, his shoulder checking the politician so hard Sterling spun around and landed in the dust. Anvil's eyes locked onto Jax, or rather, the bundle in Jax's arms. The giant biker sprinted across the debris field. He dropped to his knees in front of Jax, disregarding the sharp concrete tearing into his jeans. Mia, the man choked out. The terrifying scowl dissolved into a look of pure, agonizing vulnerability. Jax looked at the baby, then at the man. He saw the resemblance in the eyes. The fierce blue. She stopped breathing. Jax stammered, his adrenaline fading, leaving him dizzy and weak. I did CPR. She's okay now. She's breathing. Anvil reached out with hands the size of shovels, hands tattooed with skulls and daggers, and took the baby with the tenderness of handling a soap bubble. He pressed his face into her dusty stomach. He sobbed, a deep, heaving sound that shook his massive frame. Oh, God. Oh, God, Mia. He looked up at Jax. For the first time, he really saw the boy. He saw the blood soaking Jax's gray t-shirt. He saw the gaunt cheeks, the holes in the shoes, the sheer exhaustion. You, Anvil said, his voice rough as gravel. You got her out? I heard her crying, Jax whispered. The world was starting to spin. The edges of his vision were going black. Nobody else heard her. Who are you, son? Jax, he breathed. Jax, Anvil repeated, as if etching the name into stone. Just then, paramedics arrived. Sir, we need to take the child, one said nervously to the giant biker. Anvil nodded, standing up but not letting go of Mia until she was safely on the stretcher. He turned back to help Jax, but Jax was already falling. The blood loss from the shoulder, combined with the shock and hunger, finally took its toll. Jax crumpled forward. Anvil caught him before he hit the ground. I got you, kid, Anvil growled. I got you. When Jax woke up, he expected the damp chill of a basement or the hard slats of a park bench. Instead, he felt softness, clean sheets, the smell of antiseptic. He opened his eyes. He was in a hospital room. It was night. The only light came from the monitoring equipment beeping softly beside him. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his shoulder stopped him. He looked down. He was in a hospital gown. His shoulder was heavily bandaged. His arm was on an foredrip. Panic set in. Hospital bills. Social services. Foster care. He had run away from the last group home because the older boys beat him and the staff stole his government checks. He couldn't go back to the system. The door opened. A woman in a business suit walked in, holding a clipboard. She wasn't a nurse. She had the tired, cynical look of a caseworker. "You're awake," she said, not unkindly, but efficiently. "I'm Ms. Gable, Child Protective Services." Jax shrank back against the pillows. "I'm not going back. You're a minor, Jax. You have no legal guardian. You can't live on the street." She clicked her pen. "We found a placement for you at St. Jude's Boys' Home." Jax went cold. St. Jude's was notorious. It was where they sent the kids destined for prison. It was a holding pen for future felons. "Look," she sighed. "You did a good thing today. It's all over the news. But that doesn't change the law." Councilman Sterling gave a statement to the press. He said you were squatting in the building and endangered the rescue operation, but luckily the child survived. Jax's fist clenched. "That's a lie. It doesn't matter what's true, Jax. It matters what people with power say." Sterling is spinning this to save his own skin for the building collapse. He's making you the scapegoat for being there illegally. You're lucky you aren't being charged with trespassing. She checked her watch. "Get some rest. Transport comes in the morning." She left. Jack stared at the ceiling. Tears of frustration burned his eyes. He had saved a life. He had bled. And he was still just trash to be swept away. The councilman won. The system won. He looked at the window. Maybe he could climb out. Maybe he could run. Then the glass in the window frame vibrated. Hum. It was a low frequency, felt in the teeth more than heard. It grew louder. And louder. Jack slid out of bed, dragging his forced stand. He walked to the window and looked down into the hospital parking lot. His breath caught in his throat. It was a sea of red taillights and chrome. They were there. Hundreds of them. The parking lot was full. The street outside was full. They stood in silent rows, leaning against their bikes. A vigil. An army. The door to Jax's room didn't just open. It was filled. Anvil ducked to get through the frame. He was still wearing his cut, dusty from the collapse site. Behind him were two other men, one with a long braided beard, the other with tattoos covering his scalp. The caseworker, Ms. Gable, was in the hallway, looking terrified. "You can't go in there. Visiting hours are over." "We ain't visitors," Anvil rumbled, closing the door in her face. He looked at Jax. The giant man's face was unreadable. He walked to the side of the bed. "How's the shoulder?" Anvil asked. "It hurts," Jax admitted. "Good. Pain lets you know you're still in the fight." Anvil pulled up a chair and sat backward on it. "My wife. Mia's mom. She was in the building, too. Firefighters got her out. Broken leg, but she's alive. Mia is in the NICU for observation, but the docs say she's going to be fine. Because of you." Jax looked down at his hands. "The councilman, he said on the news that we know what the clown said." The bald biker cut in, his voice sharp. "We saw the footage." Anvil held up a hand to silence his brother. He leaned in close to Jax. "We had a little chat with Mr. Sterling in the lobby downstairs. He was there trying to get a photo op with you. Trying to look like a hero." Jax looked up. "What happened?" A dark, wolfish grin spread across Anvil's face. "Let's just say he decided to confess to the police about the building code violations he ignored. And he admitted that you were the one who went in when he was busy wetting his expensive suit. The police chief is a friend of ours. Sterling is in cuffs right now." Jax felt a weight lift off his chest, so heavy he hadn't realized he was carrying it. "Really? We don't lie, kid," Anvil said. "But that's not why we're here." Anvil stood up. He walked to the window and pointed outside. "You see that?" Jax nodded. "Yeah. That's 528 brothers. From the Purdue chapter, Frisco, Oakland, nomads. They rode all night." Anvil turned back to Jax. His blue eyes were intense, piercing. In our world, loyalty is currency. Respect is earned in blood. Most people, they run away from the fire. They wait for someone else to do the job. You had nothing. No home, no family, no reason to care about a world that kicked you in the teeth every day. But you ran toward the fire. Enville reached behind his back and pulled out a black leather vest. It was small, vintage. The leather was worn soft, but the patches were pristine. This belonged to my younger brother, Thomas. He died 5 years ago. He had a heart the size of a lion. Enville held the vest out to Jax. We don't leave debts unpaid, Jax. You saved my daughter. You saved my whole world. Jax stared at the vest. He looked at Anvil. I don't have any money. I can't pay you back for the hospital. The bikers laughed. A warm, booming sound. Kid, Anvil said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You aren't listening. Anvil placed a heavy hand on Jax's uninjured shoulder. He looked him dead in the eye. You are brother. 3 words. Jax had heard get out. He had heard worthless. He had heard orphan. He had never heard brother. We handle the bills, Anvil said firmly. We handle the caseworker. My wife and I, we've been approved for foster care for a long time. Never found the right fit. Until today. Anvil leaned closer. You come home with us. You got a room. You got food. You got 528 uncles who will rain absolute hell on anyone who ever tries to hurt you again. You are Hell's Angel family now. Forever. Jax's lip trembled. The wall he had built around his heart, the wall of indifference and survival, crumbled faster than the tenement building. He started to cry. Ugly, heaving sobs of relief. Enville didn't look away. He didn't tell him to man up. He simply stepped forward and pulled Jax into a hug that felt like being wrapped in iron and warmth. It's over, Jax, Enville whispered into his hair. The wandering is over. You're home. The transition wasn't instantaneous, but the protection was. When Jax was discharged 3 days later, he didn't walk out to a taxi. He walked out to a convoy. Enville walked beside him, carrying his bag. Mia was there, held by Anville's wife, Sarah, a woman with kind eyes and a cast on her leg, sitting in a wheelchair. She pulled Jax down for a kiss on the cheek that smelled of vanilla and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for my baby. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, the roar began. 528 engines fired up in unison. It was a sound that made the ground shake. It was a salute. Anvil handed Jax a helmet. Hop on the back, Prospect. We got a ride to finish. Jax climbed onto the back of Anvil's custom Harley. He wrapped his arms around a giant biker's waist. As they pulled out of the hospital lot, Jax saw a familiar figure. It was Ms. Gable, the social worker. She was standing by her car, looking stunned. Next to her was the police chief, shaking hands with the bald biker. The paperwork was done. The system had been bypassed by the sheer force of will of the Brotherhood. And further down the street, Jack saw a newspaper stand. The headline wasn't about Councilman Sterling's re-election campaign. It was a picture of Sterling being shoved into a police car with a headline, Councilman arrested for negligence, homeless hero saves infant. Jack smiled. He pressed his face against the leather of Anvil's cut. They hit the highway. The wind rushed past, hot and loud. For the first time in his life, Jax wasn't just drifting. He was moving with purpose. He was part of the pack. He looked down at his chest. Under the open hospital jacket, he was wearing the vest Anvil had given him. It was a little big, but he would grow into it. He touched the patch over his heart. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was seen. He was feared. He was loved. He was a brother. 1 year later, the garage smelled of grease, old beer, and grilled meat. It was a good smell. Jax wiped his hands on a rag, stepping back to admire his work. The old Sportster wasn't perfect, but he had rebuilt the carburetor himself. It purred like a kitten. Not bad, a deep voice rumbled behind him. Jax turned. Anvil stood there, holding 2 sodas. He looked older, more gray in the beard, but his eyes were brighter than they had been that day in the ruins. Timing is a little off on the idol, Jax critiqued himself, taking the soda. You'll fix it, Anvil said. You got the touch. A little girl, now almost 2 years old, toddled into the garage. Jax, Jax. Mia ran to him, holding up a plastic wrench. She was steady on her feet now, fierce and loud. Jax scooped her up, swinging her around until she shrieked with laughter. "What's up, troublemaker?" "Dinner," she announced. Jax put her down and watched her run back toward the house, where Sarah was calling them. The backyard was filled with laughter. About 50 angels were there for the Sunday barbecue. Anvil stayed back with Jax for a moment. He looked at the boy, who had filled out, grown 2 inches, and no longer had the haunted look of a hunted animal. "You happy, son?" Anvil asked. Jax looked at the family in the yard. He touched the silver bird necklace he still wore, now polished and bright. "Yeah, Dad," Jax said. "I'm happy." Anvil clapped him on the shoulder, the one with the scar, a jagged line that marked the day his life changed. "Let's eat," Anvil said. Jax walked into the sunlight, surrounded by his brothers, into a future that was wide open.